Greetings, my name is JC from the Gamer's Gaiden, and something pretty special came in the mail today that I kind of wanted to talk about a little bit. Whenever I was younger, I played this game quite a bit, and the original SNES version of this game was the first introduction of it, and the game that I'm speaking of, which you've probably understood by the title of the video most likely, is actually a complete in-box copy of Harvest Moon. I didn't actually ever own this game. Whenever I first played it, a friend of mine who was one of my best friends during middle school and most of high school, we actually used to play this quite a bit on his Super Nintendo. Whenever I was younger, I didn't have a Super Nintendo, but this one friend did. And I remember him seeing some screenshots in, I believe it was Nintendo Power, or it could have been a different magazine, such as like Game Players or something like that, that had some screenshots about this game Harvest Moon and it coming out. And based off of those screenshots and the articles that we read, it was like maybe 2 or 3 of them, it wasn't very many of them, got fairly excited for the game. It seemed like something fairly new. We were fans of SimCity at the time, and it was a game that we had played a lot of, that and SimCity 2000 on his Super Nintendo. Also played some simulation games and stuff like that on the computer, which is kind of where I had played most of my own games that were kind of similar to that, like some of the Sim Earth games and so on and so forth, because I had SimCity on the computer, but he had it on the Super Nintendo. So he actually ended up pre-ordering the game, and then it eventually came, and it was kind of interesting because if I recall correctly, there was only at the time one EB Games in the area, and they commented that they only actually got like 2 copies or something like that. It could have been 3, but there wasn't actually any on the shelves. The only ones that they got in were pre-orders. And I never had a Super Nintendo until middle of high school or something like that, because I actually had a Sega Genesis and I was more of a Sega kid. So whenever this game actually did end up releasing and we got our hands on the copy of it, one thing that we noticed about the Harvest Moon game almost immediately whenever we first got it was actually that it had a little bit more of a fun factor to it. Not that the sim games weren't fun, but they had more of a serious tone to it where they were going for more of a realism, and this was a little bit more refreshing because of its uniqueness in the way that it presented itself, which ended up making the game extremely entertaining. And I've always had very fond memories of this game because though the game is fairly short, it's only 2.5 years, there were many things that you could do, and you could attempt to do things differently, whether it be actually going through and only doing produce, or only managing animals, or choosing a different love interest in the game, and that basically added to the replayability. So we actually ended up playing this game many times, and eventually whenever the PlayStation had been out for quite a while and the games, some of our older games started to collect dust, this was kind of unfortunately one of those games, and he actually ended up getting rid of his copy of it by donating it to one of his cousins who were younger and really enjoyed the game as well. They didn't have a game console, so the Super Nintendo went over to them. And ever since then, I've kind of been like, oh, it'd be really cool to have my own copy of Harvest Moon. And years later, after high school, whenever I was in college, I looked at the game, and to my surprise, the game was actually worth quite a bit of money. And it wasn't kind of the upper price and tier that the game demands now for a near mint copy, and the copy that I got is by no means near mint. It's probably a 7 out of 10 for its quality. The cartridge itself might be an 8, and the manual's a 4, unfortunately. As you can see in the picture-in-picture, whenever I did unboxing of it just to make sure that the contents were real and in the box, there's some writing in the manual, and the manual goes for 200 Canadian alone, and this game is insanely priced, which is absurd. And I know that there's copies available for it on the 3DS store, and I believe it used to be available on the WiiWare store. I'm not really sure. I didn't really venture too much into the store on the Wii, but yeah, as a collector who's always wanted games, I've kind of always looked at it and been like, well, it'll probably be one of those games that I only really buy if I find a very decent price on it. And previously, in one of our recent episodes, I mentioned one of the games that I've been playing was Hero of Leaf Valley for the PSP. And it's one of my favorite Harvest Moon games. It's got a lot of features in it, but it actually started making me a little bit more nostalgic for the original one, because as a Harvest Moon fan, there's kind of three games that I constantly replay. The PlayStation 1 Back to Nature, the Game Boy Advance Friends or More Friends of Mineral Town versions, and this one, the PSP one, Hero Leaf Valley. They're probably my favorite ones. I have a high regard for the Harvest Moon DS one, but unfortunately it has a lot of bugs that makes some ways to play it a little bit unplayable, because they just don't work unless you have the patch cart, which was released much later. So I was playing Hero of Leaf Valley, and I was kind of being a little bit nostalgic for the original version because I hadn't played it in years. I remember going back to it in college whenever I had thought about it again then, that I should go ahead and get this game, which I ultimately didn't end up doing, and I played an emulated version of it. And if you know me, I like actually owning the actual physical copy of the game if that's feasible, so I actually ended up finding a fairly good quality version of the game, complete in box. It has its flaws, but it was for a fairly decent price, and I've just been playing it for the past hour, and yeah, it's what I remember. It doesn't have all the features of the series that were added to it years and years later, which ultimately kind of make the later games of this series much better, and even the new Story of Season games are really great in their own regards. The second one is a lot better than the first Story of Season games, but yeah, the Harvest Moon series has always really had a place in my heart for one of those most loved series of video games, and although I'm going to be spending a lot of my time this week playing Pokemon Shield, because I didn't have a lot of time last week in order to play it, so I kind of have to get on that in order to get through it. I'm going to be setting aside a couple of hours here and there in order to play through the Super Nintendo version of Harvest Moon, and I'm really, really looking forward to it. Yeah, the game is just... although it's very simple, it still holds a place in my mind that it's one of those great games that I used to play as a kid. And it's really great being able to go back to the game in its actual form instead of emulating it. I don't know, some people don't care, but whenever I'm actually playing the game on it the way that it was originally meant to be played, I prefer it. Maybe I'm just crazy. I'm sure if you disagree, you'll let me know. So I know that a lot of people have their favorite Harvest Moon, and there's a lot of people who like the Nintendo 64 version or the PlayStation version, but yeah, a lot of the games are really, really great, and let me know in the comments down below as to what your favorite Harvest Moon game is, and your favorite Harvest Moon memory, if you have one. Maybe it's a series that you also really enjoy. Oh, I forgot about the GameCube version, A Wonderful Life. That's another great Harvest Moon game. Anyway, if you liked the video and you want to see more like it, be sure to like and subscribe, and if you know anybody out there who you think would also like the video, why not share it with them? We also have a long format podcast that's about an hour long that we release once weekly. It usually releases on a Wednesday. Anyway, have a great day, and we'll see you in the next video. How did I forget that A Wonderful Life for the GameCube? I don't know.